What's up, everybody? Michael Walsh here. So this is a video about Bo Nickal and whether we need to reevaluate Bo Nickal now that Reinier de Ridder has defeated Robert Whittaker this weekend. Because most of us and the MMA community as a whole wrote Bo Nickal off after his first loss, and not just wrote him off, but dogpiled on him, shit all over him, made fun of him, and Nickal earned that to a large degree because Nickal, on top of being pushed by the company, on top of being on the main card of UFC 300 and whatnot, like, he was pushing for that himself. He said, I'm a main card fighter, a pay-per-view fighter. He hyped up his own abilities. He was the one trashing the actual top fighters at middleweight. He was the one trashing Hamzat, trashing Robert, trashing Dricus, So he made his bed and he did have to lay in it. However, we need to, consider like how bad we actually think he is, because de Ridder is the man who beat him, and de Ridder just beat Robert Whittaker and is on the cusp of a title shot. So is it really so bad a look for that guy to hand you your first loss, to hand you your prospect loss? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Because even going into the Whittaker fight this weekend, like, there was a lot of doublethink happening with MMA fans, because on the one hand, they were using the fact that de Ridder, this, I forget what he was ranked at the time, but I don't even think he was top 10 when he fought Bo, that this guy, he's kind of older, he's got this awkward style, he's, this former ONE champion, the fact that that guy came in and just derailed Bo the way he did, like, that showed that Bo sucks. But then on the flip side, they were saying that coming off of that win over Bo, that de Ridder should be the favorite against Whittaker. And not everyone was saying that, and I think the actual betting odds, I think, ended up having Whittaker as a slight favorite come the night of the fight, I believe. I could be wrong. But it seemed like most of the people I was listening to were picking de Ridder. And it seemed like that was the general vibe from the community. So, which is it? Does Nickal suck because he lost to someone like de Ridder, or is de Ridder so awesome that he should be the favorite against Whittaker? And that favoritism being largely grounded in the fact that he's coming off that great win over Nickal. Like, which is it? Because it would be more consistent to say that Nickal sucks because de Ridder sucks. To say, like, de Ridder is this goofy guy, he shouldn't even be in the top 10. He sucks. The fact that he did what he did to Nickal proves that Nickal is basically a tomato can. That would be consistent. It would also be consistent to say, hey, that's not such a bad look for Nickal, because de Ridder's a future champion. That's a fine guy to lose to when you're still in single-digit fights. Like, that would also be consistent. But mixing and mashing them, I'm not sure I can get behind. So let's explore it a little bit. Now, before I go in on this, I want to address, like, the topic of, like, when it is and isn't kind of appropriate to shit on fighters. Because, some people will take that angle and they'll say, like, you should respect everyone that gets in the cage, you would never say this to their face, like, that's the common line, like, this guy would kick your ass, yada yada yada. And I'm of two minds about that, because on the one hand, I don't like gossip. I don't like, being a two-faced person that talks behind people's backs. And I don't like being a fucking keyboard warrior that will trash someone who could kick my ass and then wouldn't say that to their face. I think there's legitimacy to all that. On the flip side, like, the whole point of this sport is that we like to talk about it, and we are invested in the storylines, and we care who, we have people we like, people we dislike, people we want to see win, people we want to see lose. We're fucking paying for it. Like, that's what we're here for. So, Chael Sonnen talks about that. He's like, the funnest parts of watching the sport is everything except the fights. And that's a stretch. I don't agree with that. But he's got a point that hyping it up, analyzing it, getting invested in the drama, like, that stuff is where some huge amount of not only the fun, but the actual time we invest in the sport, that's where that comes from. So there's that. And there's the fact that, like, I don't mind saying I would, that, like, I don't mind claiming that I would say this shit to Bo's face under certain circumstances. Like, I wouldn't just go up to him in public and be like, hey, you fucking suck, because not only is that just wildly rude and mean, but that really is like fighting words at that point. But, like, if I knew him a little bit, or if I trained with him, I train. If I was at his gym and I was one of his training partners, absolutely I would bust his balls about it a little bit. Like you don't think that happened? You don't think there were guys like teasing him like later, like, oh, someone's got a sensitive tummy, like, oh, you don't think that shit happened? Like, of course. And that's just normal banter, And I fought. I got knocked out and had to like go back to my gym and show my face. And like even if no one gives you shit about it, it's still awkward. It's still like a walk of shame. It's still like it's like the scene in Gangs of New York when DiCaprio shows his face for the first time after Bill beat the shit out of him and burned him with that knife. And like everyone's looking at him and it's awkward and weird. Like that's what it's like when you go back to your gym after losing a fight. Especially if you lose bad. And so all that to say, like, I don't mind voicing an opinion about Nickal as a fighter, about him, whether he, like, what his upside is as a competitor and what his like fighting spirit really shows us. I don't mind talking about that. Like, try not to be an asshole about it, try not to be a cyberbully about it, or some punk who's tough behind a keyboard or tough behind a camera, but tough in front of a camera. But I am going to say what I think. And so, as far as his upside as a competitor, as far as his ability to like chase a title shot and become a serious contender, I was never high on him. Like, I agree with everyone who pointed out that like he just wasn't showing the capability and the dominance that you would expect from someone who was going to go on to become a champion. Because yeah, he's inexperienced. Yeah, he only had 7 fights going into the De Ridder fight, but we have other analogs to look at. We have other wrestlers who turned to MMA who had their own, undefeated streaks, their own quick rises to titles or to top contender fights, who did very well. Like we have Chris Weidman. Chris Weidman was only 9-0 when he fought Anderson Silva. Michael Chandler was, I think, only 7-0 when he fought Eddie Alvarez for the Bellator title. And that's one of the top lightweights in the world. And that fight was insane. Like, I feel like I'm always defending Michael Chandler, but like, if you think any of his fights in the UFC were fun, go watch his first fight with Eddie Alvarez. It's better than all of his UFC fights. And he wins. That's when he, came to prominence. But he was only 7-0, I think, when he fought Eddie. Just look at Khamzat, I think it was either his 8th or 9th fight when he knocked out Mearshall in like 20 seconds. GM3 when he knocked him out in 20 seconds. And then right after that was Li Jing Liang, and just mauls him. And that guy's the sort of vet that's more, like at welterweight was maybe more of the level that maybe you would have thought De Ridder would have been when he was going into that Nickal fight. And look at the gap in performance, So I was never really sold on him. Like his skills and his finishing ability and everything didn't seem that good against anyone who wasn't, a completely like underqualified regional fighter. And I agree with like what Jimmy Smith pointed out, where he said like, look, if you're going to be a wrestler turned MMA fighter, you want to like get in early. You want to do it out of high school or out of college. You don't want to have a whole career as an international wrestler, because then it's too late when you finally come to MMA. You're in your, mid to late 20s before you're even learning the skills of MMA. You just don't have time to get good enough to become a world champion before you're past your prime. I think that's largely true, and I think that was always going to hurt Bo Nickal. And like he said, like that's you look at guys like Ed Ruth, Olympian. Didn't do that great in MMA, yet you'll have someone like TJ Dillashaw, who I can't remember if he even has collegiate accomplishments. I know he at least wrestled in high school, or Dennis Bermudez, or any of these kind of people, with kind of lower level wrestling accomplishments. John Jones, like, is only a junior national champion, I think. We've had much, much more decorated wrestlers, yet look what he did. So, on that level, like, I'm not super optimistic that Bo can come back and just take over. I don't really see him ever beating a Drickus, a Khamzat, probably never beating De Ridder, in a rematch, unless De Ridder's really old, because he's already a 34, I think. But I'm open to see it happen. Like, this could be the turnaround. You know, like we can compare it to Henry Cejudo. Same thing. Like wildly accomplished wrestler at the international level. Shows up, he's undefeated. Very high on himself. You know, some good hype. Loses in similar fashion. Like gets finished with a knee to the body. But then that motivates him to go transform. Comes back, wins the rematch with Demetrius, goes on to be double champ. So, like, it could happen. Now, there's reasons I don't think that will happen, and they tie into, like, the other question, which is Bo Nickal really a fighter? Does he really have a fighter's mindset, a fighter's psychology, a fighter's personality, a fighter's spirit? I truly do not think he does. And this is where, like, again, like, this can be construed as keyboard warrior shit-talking, you know, and I don't mean to disrespect Nickal in the sense that to do what he did in wrestling requires a level of not just athleticism, but competitive mindset, of discipline, of mental toughness that most of us will never touch and can't imagine. Anyone, you know, if you know anything about the grind that is competitive wrestling, you know what goes into that. You know what it takes for Bo to accomplish what he has. Okay? On top of that, I do have respect for anyone who's willing to step into the cage. It takes courage. Not only, like, I have respect for anyone who just trains. Like, even just for a little bit, like, to show up even for 6 months at a jiu-jitsu gym or at a boxing gym and actually spar and actually roll and actually get your ass beat and actually get, you know, exhausted and smothered and submitted, and to undergo that, to experience that just assault on your ego, and to not immediately run away, but to keep coming back, that takes courage. And that should be respected. So if I'm going to respect someone who just shows up to the gym for 6 months, of course I'm going to respect Bo Nickal, not just for what he's done in his wrestling, but for the fact that he stepped in the cage, that he has gotten in there 8 times. You know, even if he retires now, I respect that. Even if he says, look, okay, maybe I overestimated myself, maybe I underestimated this sport, maybe I thought this would be easier than it was. Maybe I thought this was for me and it isn't. If he stops right now, I still respect the guy. But I don't think he's a fighter. I truly don't. And I didn't think, you know, I felt that way before he lost, you know, and I'm not the only one. Like, I talked to multiple people that felt that way, but I think it's obvious, and I think we can explore why. So, again, let's compare him to other wrestlers turned MMA fighters. One of the biggest contrasts would be Justin Gaethje. Okay? Justin Gaethje, I've heard it said, I believe Trevor Whitman said this, that when Gaethje first showed up at the gym and first started talking about fighting, his reaction was like, oh, this is great. Every wrestling match I've ever had, I just wanted to punch the guy in the fucking face. Now I can just do it. This is great. Like, that's just music to your ears if you're a coach and someone like that comes in, because that's a fighter. A natural fighter. You know, and that can turn bad. You know, I just saw an interview with Mike Tyson where he was on some podcast and they asked him what sport he would play if he never did boxing. And he said, if I never boxed, I'd be a criminal. Fighting's the only sport I like. And he was dead serious about it, and I fucking believe him, because even when he was a boxer, he was a fucking criminal too. Like, God knows what he would have gotten up to if he never found boxing, you know? But that guy's a fighter, a natural fighter, okay? And sure, maybe that's a little unfair to be like, well, you're not as much of a fighter as Justin Gaethje and Mike Tyson, so you suck. You know, maybe that's not fair. But I think it's not just those guys. I look at other wrestlers. I look at Kamaru Usman. I look at Michael Chandler. I look at TJ Dillashaw. I look at Frankie Edgar. And I see guys who are natural fighters. I see guys who are comfortable under fire. I see guys who have a killer instinct. You know, Khamzat Chimaev again. You know, greatest killer instinct I've ever seen in my fucking life is Khamzat Chimaev. Like, guys with the killer instinct, comfortable under fire, you know, willing to take their licks. You know, they're invested enough that they care more about hurting you than about protecting themselves. You know? And that doesn't mean they fight stupid. Some of them do. Like, Gaethje was just a true brawler up until the Poirier loss. But, like, you know, I'm not saying these are defensively void idiots that are just there to take one to give one, but I'm saying they're willing to. I'm saying that they don't mind it. They don't mind getting hurt so that they can hurt you. They've signed up for that, and they're about that life, you know. And when I see Nickal, even in his wins, not just the DeRitter fight, but even in his wins, I don't see any of that. I don't see the finishing instinct. I don't see and not just, like, I've seen him finish guys. You know, I've seen him finish guys quite comfortably and easily, and I've seen him do it with submissions. I've seen him do it with knockouts. I'm not saying he's incapable of finishing, and especially when he's up against overmatched opposition, but I don't see the finishing instinct. I don't see that killer instinct. I don't see like what I saw in like a young Conor McGregor. I don't see what I see when I watch Alex Pereira fight. I don't see what I see when I watch Khamzat fight. I don't see what I see when I watch Yuri Prohaska fight. You know what I mean? Guys who are really like hungry to finish you. You know what I mean? I just see a guy playing a game that he's good at against people that aren't as good as him. You know what I mean? And that DeRitter loss was a bad look. Like, yes, you know, we're seeing that DeRitter's clinch game is just actually nasty, that he can fuck you up with body shots. You know, he clearly winded Whittaker with them. I'm not 100% sure where I fall on the debate about, like, did Whittaker gas because he's old? Did he blow his wad a bit in round 3 when he tried to finish him? Was it the knees to the body? What combination of all three of those was it? I think it was a combination, because I don't buy that. That's definitely not Prime Whittaker, and I don't buy that Prime Whittaker's getting wilted like that by those fucking knees. I saw Whittaker fight Romero in the rematch in Chicago. That man is putting up a stronger fight in rounds 2 through 5. Okay? Just straight up. But, you know, what does that mean then that Bo Nickal got so quickly dispatched by those knees and that he reacted the way he did? You know, can we be more forgiving at how he winced under those shots? To a degree we can, because we know that DeRitter's good at that, but like, in the same sense, no. I just didn't see the struggle. I didn't see the resistance. I saw a guy who wilted when it got hard. That's what I saw. And that happens. Like that, you know, again, this isn't meant to be a shit on Bo as a person and call him a pussy kind of video. He's not a pussy, you know, but like, he's an incredibly mentally strong person. It's just that we're strong in different ways. And again, to circle back to Mike Tyson, I saw a different interview where he was, I forget who he was even talking about, but he was talking about Cus D'Amato, his coach. He was reminiscing, and he was talking about when he was wondering, he's like, I don't know what Cus saw in me that made him so confident I could be a world champion, because he told me very early on that I was going to be a world champion. I just don't know what he saw in me. And the interviewer was like, well, surely he saw how athletic you were, how fast you were, how powerful you were. And Tyson just says, it takes more than that to be a fighter. And he's right. He's absolutely right. And so again, I'm not saying Bo isn't a tough person. I'm just saying he's not a fighter. He's not showing me what a fighter shows me. Compare this to, I believe it's Scott Smith, who has that famous fight in Strikeforce where he gets hurt to the body and he's just, oh, God, you just see him, like if you've ever been hit by a liver shot, you know what that feels like. But you just see him tightening up and just, oh, God. And the other dude sees it and goes, oh, shit. So he runs in to finish him. And Smith just goes, no, and just fucking, you know, does like Derek Lewis pretends to do, but actually did it because he was actually hurt, and knocks the guy out. Like, I didn't see that determination, that doggedness in those conditions from Bo Nickal. You know what I mean? And, you know, whereas I've seen other guys, look at what Chandler went through to beat Alvarez. Look at what, you know, even just look at Khamzat in the Burns fight. You know, it was a bit, you know, it deflated some of his aura, but it showed that he was down to scrap, that he could take a shot, and then he would, you know, like, we've still got our questions about his gas tank, but we saw that he won't wilt just because you throw back at him, just because you give him some opposition, just because you hurt him, he ain't going away. You know what I mean? Look at Frankie Edgar versus Gray Maynard 2. You know? Look at that arguably 10-7 round where Maynard drops him multiple times. Like, look at the fact that he came back from that and took it to a draw. You know? Like, I just don't... I'm not seeing that from Nickal, you know? And And it's not just the loss. I just don't see that in his other fights. I don't see it in his... I don't see a guy who's willing to be in bad positions. I don't see a guy who's willing to risk things, frankly. You know, I look at the Paul Craig fight, I look at the fact that he not only didn't finish him, but he wouldn't wrestle with him. You know, like I just can't... I don't see a guy... You know, can you imagine, like, Khamzat doing that? Can you imagine Khamzat just being unwilling to even shoot a takedown on Paul Craig? I know Khamzat ultimately chose not to wrestle with Gilbert Burns and had a brawl with him instead, but he still shot on him. He still got him down. Like he at least tried. He at least said, like, okay, let's feel this out. Like, okay, Mr. Jiu-Jitsu man, like, let's see what you got. Like, Nickal didn't even try. You know, like, so, you know. And we don't just have, like, I'm comparing him to all these wrestlers. Like, we can compare him to all sorts of people. Look at Royce Gracie. You know, I get that it's, you know, in vogue now to shit on the Gracies, and there's a million things about the Gracies that are silly, and that they do lie and exaggerate, and they are just self-promoters, you know, to the 50th degree. And I get all that. And I get that Chrome Gracie just embarrassed the whole, not just the whole family, but like the whole art of BJJ by just fighting the way he did in his UFC run. But, you know, people have got to remember, like, especially the original Gracies, like, those guys were fighters. Like, Royce included. Like, not only was he tough and durable and did he survive beatings to come back to submit guys, but he was just like a hard dude. Like, I can't remember which fight it is, but I remember in one of them, he gets the guy down, he gets on his back, and he's got his hooks in, and he's got like this sort of double underhook seatbelt, you know, under the guy's arms, and the guy is holding, you know, and probably grabbing the gi and stuff to try to keep Royce from pulling his arms out and going for the choke. And Royce, like, very quickly, you know, because he's there, he's just going for the kill, like, he very quickly just postures up and just like headbutts the guy in the back of the head. That's nasty shit. Like, that guy, like, Royce Gracie was down to scrap. Like, those old Gracie guys, they had that Diaz brother energy. You know what I mean? Like, and again, I'm just not seeing any of that from Bo Nickal, you know? So in many ways, you know, you could question the point of this video, because it's like, all that is to say, no, actually, I think we were right about Bo, and we actually don't need to change much of our view of him. You know, I think we can be a little nicer about it, maybe, and we can be open to being wrong. Again, he could go the Cejudo route. He could prove us wrong. This could be a big turnaround. You know, I actually don't mind some of the interviews he's done since. Sure, there's excuses, and sure there's delusion, and sure he seems to be surrounded by yes men. But, you know, if he needs to bullshit himself into getting better and coming back and winning, like, so what? That's better than doing the Ronda Rousey thing and just, like, taking your ball and going home. Like, I'd rather him be delusional and come back and just not let it bother him, you know? Now, that could backfire in the sense that that might mean he doesn't make the right changes. You know, if he is truly surrounded by yes men, they might not be pushing him in the gym the ways that he needs to be. And that was a concern people had watching the loss, because you're like, haven't you been, like, hurt to the body in the gym yet? Like, you look like this has never happened to you. You're having, like, a Brock Lesnar reaction to body shots. Could be. But I'm open to see, you know. I wouldn't bet on it because, again, I don't see the fighter. You know, because Henry Cejudo, even prior to the Demetrius loss, showed that he was down to scrap. And we saw it afterwards, right? Like, look at the Marlon Moraes fight. Look at the beating he took, the beating to his legs, like the shots he was taking. That's a prime Moraes, like a dangerous finisher. And the fact that he was willing to bite down and say, fuck this, I'm going to pressure this guy, I'm just going to beat the fight out of him. You know, I had a game plan, it's not working, he's picking me apart, I'm getting hurt, I'm just going to break this guy. And I'm just going to come forward, and I'm just going to right hand, until this guy gives up. And that's what happened. And I just, for the life of me, can never imagine Bo Nickal doing that. And I could be wrong, you know, and it's, you know, and this is a guy on the internet talking shit, but it's also on Bo to prove me wrong, right? If he wants to be a world champ, if he wants to be considered a great fighter, he's got to show us.